Okay, so I want to talk about leading uncertainty, leading it, leading your teams safely and feeling that as a leader in a context of uncertainty. There's a lot of talk about psychological safety and how you get teams excited about things and how you kind of innovate, but also it's very important to acknowledge something which comes up very often in our discussions, which is that people are very tired at the moment, very stressed, lots of pressure on you, and the future is very uncertain. And the fairly immediate future is very uncertain, not the very distant future. The policies, the pressure, the dead, things could change tomorrow or this afternoon. That's what that's what I keep hearing. Um, so there's a regular reference to psychological safety. Hear this quite a lot in NHS communications from, the kind of leadership and team development bodies down. And I wonder if you all really know what psychological safety means or whether you just keep hearing it a lot. And the quickest way really to kind of understand it is to just think about what it feels like to be in your team, what it feels like for you, but what it might feel like for each of the members of the team at different levels. So the GPs, I mean, those at the top usually are the ones that set the culture of safety. Um, but certainly within GP boards, you might also have individuals that don't feel particularly safe because that power can be spread differently. But if we think across the whole team, from the managers, the other clinicians, nurses, your admin staff, and whoever else is in your team, there's a question around whether people really feel that it's okay to take a go at things, to fail, to openly communicate to you that they failed, um, and for that to be transformed into a learning experience that is shared with other people and creates, an informed decision-making process going forwards. Um, and quite often, at the level of leaders like yourself, that can be experienced in two ways. One, do you really feel that your team go off and try things, and do you feel that they come back and say when they've gone right or wrong? Do you expect things to go wrong? And are you okay with that when they do, or is it like another problem you've got to deal with and it panics you and it's actually stressful? But also it's for you thinking about what it's like working with your own board as well. So I've worked with managers who say similar things about their boards. The board like to see things succeed. They don't, they find it difficult when it's not going well. And they can do things like take over or take control or micromanage, and not really a context of, where it feels like the team have been set free to do things with the expectation that sometimes they'll go well and sometimes they won't. It's important to notice that under masses of pressure, this can be very difficult to do, and you are under a lot of pressure. Somebody told me the other day, and it's probably true for some of you, that they're having to report their vaccination data 3 times a day to NHS England. And they were like, the percentage difference is phenomenally low, um, but there's a definite sense that they are being monitored and evaluated, um, which which doesn't feel right, I guess, for them. They felt that, that feels like it's getting in the way more than being helpful. It's not, they can understand why that might be something the government wants and needs, but as a team, feeling like, almost minute to minute you're being evaluated is very high pressure, isn't it? And that's an important thing to think about when we think about zones for teams and how they're performing. Because in a very psychologically safe place, um, which if you think about here on the left, if you have a very high psychologically safe place with a very low performance pressure, it feels very nice. Some people accuse some of my groups that I run of feeling like this. I've had project managers say, "Are they not just coming for a hug?" It feels like they're all coming for a hug. And I have to be very careful that that isn't what it feels like. But certainly, it's sometimes in our lives, and certainly for sometimes in teams, you want that. You want the ability for comfort. You want the ability that you can bring yourselves together, you can take pressure off, um, and people can feel like it's safe. What you don't want is no pressure and no safety. So you don't want an environment where there's no pressure and also there's no like teaming. The team are not encouraged to try things. There's no innovation going on. What you get there is a kind of disconnect, where essentially it doesn't feel safe and you're not really being pushed to do anything. And so you don't really feel it. Some of you may have projects you can think about like this. There must be projects in your practices that you're supposed to be getting on with. There's not really any pressure to get on with them. And it doesn't feel particularly great to talk about that. So they just probably get shoved to the back of the diary all the time and don't get a lot of attention. Of course, you can put masses of pressure on people, and you are experiencing a lot of pressure at the moment, and an expectation that you are going to succeed and not an allowance for you to fail. So that's low safety and high pressure, and that's really quite anxious for teams. You know, this sense of high pressure, low safety. I mean, you know, one of those areas might be a clinical area, such as, you know, surgery might feel like that, I guess, where if you know, you absolutely have to be keeping a lot of people alive and, you know, the stakes are very high, it can feel very tense. And certainly, I've met paramedics who tell me that, that's what it feels like, that, you know, you're up against the clock all of the time. And psychological safety is probably not the right word, but, you know, on an emotional level, seeing people die or seeing people not make it back to the hospital or seeing people, you know, queuing up outside a hospital is, you know, is a very anxious position. The optimal position for a team is when, you know, they're really supported to be creative. There's a lot of allowance for them to fail and succeed. And, you know, for you as a leader, you really encourage that and you're looking for opportunities to learn. But there is pressure for people to get on with it. So it's kind of like a huggy, learny environment with goals. And we call that a learning zone. I want you to have a think really, because, you know, we're part of why we've come along to you, obviously, is to support you in thinking about how you could be successful with eConsult. It might be thinking about where your team are in these zones. I'm going to ask that question again at the end of this presentation. So this would be the classic approach to building a learning culture. I'm saying classic because I'm going to, in a minute, talk about why this might be changed in the current situation of COVID and whatnot. But ultimately, you know, to build a psychologically safe culture where you're driving towards success, you know, you'd want to at least have these four components. One is a real kind of clarity for your team about the vision. What are they going to get out of it? Why would the team want eConsult? I mean, I'm pretty sure you all know that when you try and introduce change, you get a lot of naysayers in the team and you get other people who are more keen. And the job of leaders like yourselves is a lot of it's doing selling across the team all the time, trying to persuade people to give it a go, bringing data in. I certainly know that when I work with practices, you know, that can be one of the hardest parts. The next one is this, you know, understanding the value of getting your team behind a project and using them well. So one of the challenges in primary care I see is often that boards and managers often struggle to delegate. You know, you're often been undertrained to do this, but also the whole hierarchical medical model doesn't really train that in either. There's often a lot of keeping things close and, you know, giving out tasks but not giving out responsibility. One of the real important parts of getting your team around a project is sharing the responsibility. So actually, you know, not just saying to somebody, I'd like you to fix this, but saying to somebody, you know, I'd like you to take responsibility of working out what the solution might be. And that might be, you know, running some trials, getting it wrong, coming together, thinking about it, and then, you know, arriving at a solution. It's really important, as I've put, to expect that you're going to crash. You know, projects don't always succeed. You're definitely going to have experience of this, but as a practice, you've got to have that capability within yourselves to be, you know, to sigh, you know, take a breath and realize you've got to dust yourselves off and try again. That's actually very difficult to do when you're under such pressure from above, and when, you know, there's CQC and all these other things that look in at practices. But it is actually very important to get your team really engaged and motivated, and it helps innovation for you to be saying to your team, you know, we're not going to succeed every time. There's a saying really around this, which is, you know, if you want your teams to dare to win, you know, they have to be able to risk a fail. If people are afraid to risk a fail, they'll never dare enough to win. They'll only ever take real safe, certain routes, which we'll talk about in a second. The other one is, you know, we do that in this space, is thinking about how you're going to reflect and learn together, which means you actually have to actively create spaces to do that. You know, it's probably not enough to just get emails flying around saying this went wrong, that went wrong, I'm going to have another go. It can be really good for the team to come together and to embrace those outcomes and to try and learn together. And I say to teams all the time, if you can get this learning culture, that is winning. That is innovation. Innovation is not, getting it right every time. It is, it's learning together. My greatest example of this is WD-40, which everybody knows, water displacement 40, very famous spray that we use for just about everything. It's called WD-40 because it took them 40 attempts to get that chemical correct. And you can imagine that there would have been team meetings where they were like, oh, it hasn't worked again. And it's just worth recognizing that they must have had those meetings 40 times to get there. And if they'd had a culture where, they really just expected to win quickly, we'd have never had WD-40. And I'd have never understood how I get chewing gum out of hair. Although I'm not sure if anyone else uses it for that. Okay, so just thinking about uncertainty and certainty, if we think about these things in life and work, it's very important to kind of see it as perhaps a grid, where there's safety going up and down the grid and certainty going and uncertainty going across the grid. So on the top left, we have this position of safe certainty. So safe certainty, I don't know if you can think of any examples in your life where you have safe certainty. And a lot of these things are, they're relative, they're illusions. Like we're all fairly certain that we've still got our job tomorrow, and we feel safe with that usually. And that's something that, doesn't worry us all of the time. And there's certain things in your clinical job that you'll feel very safe about as well, and in your managerial job as well. What we don't want is unsafe certainty. So we don't want where we absolutely think things are certain, but they're not to a level of being unsafe. So, you've all seen examples of this, clinicians who perhaps are not reflecting on their practice or not looking at their statistics enough. They feel that they're doing well, but the statistics are saying they're not. That's an unsafe position. That's why we have clinical governance. So we want to try and avoid that. There's unsafe uncertainty, which is probably how a lot of people might be feeling right now. Which is they feel there's a lot of pressure, a lot of change. That how long can we survive without burning out? What's the future going to have? I hear from managers, and I've heard from you guys over the last few months. You get that day to day. You put in a plan, and you feel like you've got a bit of safe certainty coming together, and then you get an email from the CCG, and within 10 minutes, like that's all out the window, and it's all back to being unsafe again and uncertain. You also have that other situation where you're kind of pushed between these bottom two. So your team are asking you to give them certainty. They want to know what's going to happen. They want solutions that they are trying to feel safe. And it can feel unsafe to say to your team, I don't know. That can make you nervous. That feels unsafe. Sometimes managers, they try and answer those questions. So they try and give their team a sense of certainty or a sense of predictability. And what they can be doing is accidentally creating unsafe certainty. So you're trying to say to your team, oh, here's some predictability. You can take this to the bank, whilst knowing within 10 minutes a new email might change all of that. And what we're trying to oh, my graph's wrong. What we're trying to get is to a position of safe uncertainty. So the top right should say safe uncertainty. And safe uncertainty is where you kind of openly accept that there's only so many things you can control in life, and that the situation you're in now has got a lot more uncontrollable and unpredictable things in it. But you've got behaviors and mechanisms in your team to help you with that, so that it feels safe even though it's uncertain. And what's interesting is that's kind of how we live usually. Actually, we feel safe getting in cars and going upstairs, even though lots of people get hurt doing those things. We've learned to kind of get used to certain levels of risk in our lives, and we think there's certainty, but in truth, a lot of that is an illusion, isn't it? That we can never really predict what's going to happen. So I just want to think with you a little bit. I'm just going to give you some ideas here. What you can do as a leader in this space you're in now, where there is just lots of uncertainty. And not only is there uncertainty, but there's lots of very tired people. And when people are very tired and frustrated, that this all gets exaggerated a lot. Fear and anxiety, it's all exaggerated when you're pushed to the edge. So I just want you to think about these as leaders and what, in terms of your practice. I'm just going to describe them very quickly, but they're things you might think about doing to support your teams. And some of them we've talked about, and some of them you're already talking about doing since last time we met. So thinking with your team about short-term goals, that often takes precedence. And I imagine you're doing a lot of that. It's really important for you to continue talking about long-term goals. It'd be very helpful for your team to hear leaders who believe, COVID's going to pass, things are going to get back to normal. It can be helpful to be saying those conversations out loud, what we're going to do in 6 months or a year that doesn't have COVID in every conversation. That creates a kind of opportunity for the team really to connect to something bigger than the current challenge. Small wins are really important. It can help teams to see what you're doing well. That creates a sense that, even in this context of uncertainty, you're still able to achieve things. And I've heard you all say that you're doing things like that, but, you might want to ramp that up a little bit more and be thinking, if you are, if you're winning in very small ways, they might be much smaller than what the Department of Health's looking for. If you're winning, you should definitely spot that. I think that, it's important for leaders to think out loud positively about the future. So your leaders, which means, you might have lots of anxiety and be sick of the system, but probably shouldn't say that too often to your team. You can hear them and validate them, but, you want to find your own space to be saying that, because people are going to want to lean on you as a bit of a foundation for them. So I think you can do that to a degree, but be very careful, you don't join the ranks and inadvertently create a coup. You're actually trying to steer your team towards energy and positivity in the face of the fact that it's challenging. This one's very important. Not knowing is fine. It's actually okay to say you don't know. And it's okay to say that quite often. You can follow that up by saying, but I'm confident in us as a team that we can work it out. Let's get a meeting together and do that. You can turn that into a solution. But I think you should avoid trying to reach this unsafe certainty position all the time. It's okay to accept you don't know, because the truth is, in many ways, currently we don't. Another thing is to enable your team rather than save them. Lots of managers I know burn out because they're piling in on everybody all the time, helping their team to fix little things, putting out lots of fires. Rather than, getting in on all of those situations, it might help to start changing your own language. So when people come to you and say, I'm stuck with this, or this is happening, there's very simple questions like, what might you need to affect that? Or what could you do to solve that out? Or what do you think's missing for you to get that done? Is starting to get your team to realize you've given them responsibility for fixing this. You're there to provide support, but not to inherit the problem. And I bet lots of you inherit the problems for lots of things quite often. I'm looking at Scarlett in particular because I hear the things you say. Be compassionate to yourself and to your team. What I mean by this is, when your team are upset or stressed, this is about safety. It's okay for your team to get angry or get upset. It isn't an attack on you necessarily, it's an attack on the situation, and you can hear that. And like you would with a friend, you can be a bit compassionate, not to the point where you let everything grind to a halt. You have got to keep things moving, but you can allow those feelings. But really importantly, you must allow them for yourself as well. You have to find places to fill your own tank. You have to be able to, let out pressure. You have to be capable of looking after your team. I've said before, I have a rule for you guys: 51% of the time or of your energy must be spent looking after yourself, 49% your team, because they all depend on you. You're actually really you're indispensable, really. If you're talking about admin team failing and not turning up, if you don't turn up because you're ill, that is an absolute catastrophe for the team. So it's really important that you look after yourself. And I've already said about the last one, which is, when people come in talking about problems and being stuck, start thinking about how you use a different response if you're not using it already, which is to get them to think with you about how they're going to solve that problem. Like, don't take the responsibility from people. People actually like responsibility, and they like managers that help them to be successful with it. And lastly, create the time to think. It's very difficult to do all of this if you don't have time to plan it and think about it. So, as a leader, it's not helpful for you to have a diary which has 50 hours in of constant doing. You have to be planning and being a strategist at times. And I think that's really important. You can't create safety if you yourself are depleted and on the edge of snapping. Like you are essentially, you're not safe yourself, and so your team won't feel that either.